Daniel has discovered a faith he never imagined he would have. The Virgin Mary did not just change my son's legs, Rebecca reflects. She changed our entire family. But this story begins 3 years earlier, when hope seemed like a cruel joke and miracles were a word from storybooks, not from real life. Ethan Miller was born on a Tuesday in March. The delivery was complicated. Oxygen deprivation during birth. The doctors worked quickly, but those critical minutes changed everything. Rebecca held her son for the first time and saw only perfection. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, eyes that seemed to look right through her soul. She had no idea that her world had just fractured into before and after. The diagnosis came at 6 months. Severe cerebral palsy. The neurologist, Dr. Martinez, spoke with clinical precision that felt like bullets. Significant motor impairment, limited muscle control, developmental delays. The prognosis, he said, adjusting his glasses with hands that had delivered this news too many times, is that Ethan will never walk independently. Rebecca heard the words but could not process them. Never walk, never run, never chase butterflies in the backyard, or kick a soccer ball, or dance at his own wedding. The future she had imagined dissolved like sugar and rain. Daniel took the news differently. He became obsessed with solutions, second opinions, experimental treatments, physical therapy programs. He researched for hours every night, convinced that somewhere someone had an answer the doctors were missing. If we just work hard enough, he told Rebecca, we can beat this. But cerebral palsy does not respond to determination alone. By age 7, Ethan required assistance with nearly everything. He could not walk, could not stand without support. His legs remained bent and rigid, muscles locked in permanent tension. Rebecca spent her days lifting, carrying, positioning, adjusting. Her back ached constantly. Her hands developed calluses. She loved her son with ferocity that surprised her, but exhaustion was slowly drowning that love under waves of endless routine. Daniel worked double shifts at the manufacturing plant. Someone had to pay for the medical bills, the specialized equipment, the therapy sessions that insurance barely covered. He left before sunrise and returned after dark, his face gray with fatigue, his conversations reduced to practical matters. Did you call about the wheelchair modification? When is the next appointment with Dr. Martinez? How much did the new leg braces cost? Their marriage had become a logistics operation. 2 people coordinating care schedules and bill payments, but rarely looking at each other anymore. Rebecca could not remember the last time Daniel had touched her with affection rather than just passing Ethan between them. The tension crystallized one evening in late September. Rebecca suggested attending a healing service at the Catholic church downtown, a visiting priest known for prayer ministry. Daniel stared at her like she had proposed flying to the moon. You want to waste our time on that, he said, his voice flat with exhaustion. It might help. Rebecca, we need real solutions. Physical therapy, medical intervention, not fairy tales. Rebecca felt something crack inside her chest. What we need is hope, Daniel. Do you remember what that feels like? Daniel left the room without answering. Rebecca stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the sound of Ethan playing in the living room, his happy noises a stark contrast to the silence between his parents. She had stopped praying months ago. God felt absent, indifferent to her suffering. But standing there with dirty dishes in the sink and unpaid bills on the counter and a husband who could not even look at her anymore, Rebecca felt something shift. Maybe she had given up too soon. Maybe miracles were not fairy tales after all. She just did not know that the miracle would arrive in the form of an elderly neighbor with kind eyes and a porcelain image older than anyone could remember. Would you like me to continue to Chapter 2? Mrs. Thompson appeared on a Thursday afternoon in October. Rebecca was struggling to get Ethan from the wheelchair to the living room floor mat when the doorbell rang. She considered ignoring it. Her back was screaming, Ethan was fussing, and she had no energy for solicitors or neighbors wanting to chat about nothing important. But the doorbell rang again, patient and persistent. Rebecca opened the door to find an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. wearing a simple blue cardigan and holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. The woman's face was deeply lined, but her brown eyes held a warmth that made Rebecca's defenses soften immediately. "Hello, dear. I am Margaret Thompson. I moved into the house 3 doors down last month. I thought I would introduce myself properly." Rebecca glanced at the plate. "I appreciate it, Mrs. Thompson, but this really is not a good time." Mrs. Thompson looked past Rebecca into the living room, where Ethan sat on his floor mat surrounded by therapy balls and foam wedges. Her expression shifted into something Rebecca could not quite name. Not pity, something deeper. Recognition, perhaps. "That must be your son. What a beautiful boy. His name is Ethan. He has cerebral palsy. May I come in for just a moment? I promise not to take much of your time." Something in the woman's voice made Rebecca step aside. Mrs. Thompson walked directly to Ethan and lowered herself onto the floor with surprising grace for someone who had to be at least 70 years old. She set the plate aside and smiled at the boy. "Hello, Ethan. My name is Margaret. Do you like stories?" Ethan made a sound that might have been yes. His communication was limited, but his eyes locked onto Mrs. Thompson with unusual focus. "Then I will tell you one. There was once a young man who could not use his legs. Everyone said he would never walk, but he had friends who believed in him so strongly that they carried him to meet someone special. And do you know what happened? He stood up and walked home carrying his own mat." Rebecca froze. She recognized the biblical story, though Mrs. Thompson told it without mentioning Jesus or miracles directly. Just a simple tale about believing when everyone else had given up. Ethan listened with complete attention, his usually restless body perfectly still. Mrs. Thompson stayed for 20 minutes, telling 2 more stories. A blind man who learned to see. A little girl everyone thought was dead who woke up and asked for breakfast. Each story had the same thread. Someone facing the impossible, and then the impossible happening anyway. When Mrs. Thompson finally stood to leave, she touched Ethan's head gently. "You are a very special boy, Ethan. I can see it in your eyes." After she left, Rebecca found herself staring at the closed door. Ethan was smiling, really smiling, in a way he rarely did anymore. The physical therapy sessions left him frustrated and exhausted. The medical appointments made him cry. But this woman's stories had brought light to his face. Rebecca unwrapped the plate Mrs. Thompson had brought. Chocolate chip cookies, still warm, the chocolate melted and gooey. She bit into one and tasted something she had not experienced in years. Comfort. Simple, uncomplicated comfort. The next day, Mrs. Thompson returned. And the day after that. And the day after that. Each afternoon at 2 o'clock, she would ring the doorbell with a small offering. Fresh cookies, a cup of homemade soup, a single flower from her garden. And each time, she would sit with Ethan and tell him stories. Stories about people who overcame impossible obstacles. Stories about faith and persistence. Stories about miracles that happened when you least expected them. Rebecca began to look forward to those visits. The house felt less empty when Mrs. Thompson was there. Ethan became more engaged, more present. Even his physical therapist, Sarah Williams, commented on the change during their Friday session. "Ethan is different lately. More cooperative. More focused. Have you changed something in his routine?" Rebecca mentioned the elderly neighbor and the daily stories. Sarah smiled. "Whatever inner peace she is bringing him, keep it up. Emotional calm helps everything. When children feel safe and happy, their bodies respond better to therapy." Rebecca wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that something as simple as stories could make a difference. But she also remembered Daniel's words about fairy tales and false hopes. She remembered the neurologist's clinical assessment that Ethan would never walk. Still, watching her son's face light up each afternoon when the doorbell rang, Rebecca felt something dangerous beginning to grow in her chest. Something she had buried deep after the diagnosis. Something that felt terrifyingly fragile. "Hope, would you like me to continue to Chapter 3? Daniel noticed the changes immediately. He came home from his shift at the plant on a Tuesday evening and found a stranger sitting on his living room floor with his son. An elderly woman with silver hair, telling Ethan some elaborate story about a boy who climbed a mountain everyone said was too tall to climb. Rebecca was in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming softly. Daniel could not remember the last time he had heard her hum. "Rebecca," he called, his voice carrying an edge. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Rebecca came to the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face was more relaxed than he had seen in months. "Oh, that is Mrs. Thompson. She lives 3 houses down. She has been visiting Ethan every afternoon. Every afternoon. She tells him stories. He loves them, Daniel. You should see how he lights up when she arrives." Daniel looked back into the living room, where this Mrs. Thompson was now helping Ethan clap his hands together in some kind of rhythm game. Who is this woman? What do we actually know about her? She's a sweet lady who bakes cookies and spends time with our son. Rebecca, we do not know anything about her. She could be anyone. She's being kind, Daniel. When was the last time anyone outside our family showed Ethan that kind of attention? Daniel felt the accusation beneath her words. When was the last time he had shown Ethan that kind of attention? When was the last time he had done anything besides work and sleep and work again? Mrs. Thompson left a few minutes later, saying goodbye to Ethan with a gentle pat on his head and a promise to return tomorrow with a new story. She nodded politely to Daniel as she passed him in the hallway. He did not smile back. After the door closed, Daniel turned to Rebecca. "I do not want her coming here every day." "Why not?" "Because this is our home, Jennifer. Our family. We cannot just let strangers waltz in here whenever they feel like it." Her name is Margaret Thompson. She is 72 years old. She is a widow. She moved here from Ohio to be closer to her daughter. She worked as a librarian for 40 years. She volunteers at the food bank. Does that sound dangerous to you? That is not the point. Then what is the point, Daniel? The point is that I work all day to provide for this family. I work hard to pay for Ethan's treatments and equipment. When I come home, I want to find my family, not some stranger filling my son's head with stories. Stories about what? About people overcoming obstacles. About hope. About never giving up. What exactly is wrong with that? Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. He was so tired. Tired in his bones. Tired in a way that sleep could not fix. Because those are fairy tales, Rebecca. They are not real. Ethan has cerebral palsy. No story is going to change that. So we should just give up. Stop hoping for anything better. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need to be realistic. We need to focus on actual treatments, actual therapy, actual medical solutions. Not some old woman's fantasy stories about miracles. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. Maybe I need those stories, Daniel. Maybe Ethan needs them. Maybe hope is not a fantasy. Maybe it is the only thing keeping us going. Daniel wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was drowning him. He could not fight with Rebecca and fight the world and fight his own despair all at the same time. Fine, let her come, but do not be surprised when nothing changes. He walked to the bedroom and closed the door. Through the wall, he could hear Rebecca crying softly in the kitchen. He wanted to go to her, to hold her, to tell her he was sorry. But he did not know how to cross the distance that had grown between them. In the living room, Ethan made a small sound. Not distressed, almost content, like the stories had left some residue of peace in him that lingered even after Mrs. Thompson left. Daniel lay down on the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling. He did not believe in miracles. He believed in work and effort in medical science. But he also knew that Rebecca was drowning, and if these stories kept her afloat a little longer, maybe he should stop fighting them, even if they were just fairy tales, even if nothing would ever really change. Would you like me to continue to Chapter 4? Mrs. Thompson continued her daily visits despite Daniel's obvious disapproval. She arrived every afternoon at 2 o'clock with the precision of someone who understood that consistency mattered to children like Ethan. Sometimes she brought small gifts. A colorful feather she found on her morning walk. A smooth stone from the river. A picture book with bright illustrations. But mostly she brought stories. Stories about David facing Goliath. About Daniel surviving the lions. About Moses parting impossible waters. She never preached or lectured. She simply told the stories as if they were adventures, exciting tales about ordinary people who faced extraordinary challenges. Ethan listened with an intensity that amazed Rebecca. Her son, who struggled to focus on anything for more than a few minutes, would sit completely still for Mrs. Thompson's entire visit. His eyes never left her face. His body relaxed in a way it rarely did, even during sleep. Rebecca began joining them, sitting on the floor beside Ethan while Mrs. Thompson spoke. She found herself drawn into the stories too, not because she believed they were literal truth, but because they contained something she desperately needed. The idea that impossible situations could change, that suffering had purpose, that hope was not foolish. One afternoon in late October, Mrs. Thompson finished a story about a paralyzed man whose friends lowered him through a roof to reach a healer. She looked at Rebecca with those knowing brown eyes. "You know, dear, these stories are not just about the people who were healed. They are about the people who believed healing was possible. The friends who carried the man to the roof. The mother who would not stop asking for help. The father who walked miles to find hope." Rebecca felt tears sting her eyes. "Are you saying I should have more faith?" "I am saying you already have more faith than you realize. You wake up every day and care for Ethan. You fight for him. You love him even when it is exhausting. That is faith, Rebecca. Faith is not believing everything will be easy. Faith is continuing when everything is hard." That night, Rebecca tried to share Mrs. Thompson's words with Daniel. They were eating dinner in silence, as had become their custom. Ethan was already asleep in his room. "Daniel, do you think faith matters? Not religion exactly, but just believing that things can get better." Daniel set down his fork. "Where's this coming from?" "Mrs. Thompson said something today that made me think about how faith is not magic. It is just not giving up." "Rebecca, I know you like her stories. I know Ethan enjoys her visits. But we need to be careful. We cannot let ourselves get pulled into thinking that believing hard enough will change Ethan's condition. The doctors were clear. Cerebral palsy is permanent. No amount of faith will fix damaged neural pathways. So we just accept that this is it. This is all Ethan will ever have. I'm saying we focus on what is real. Physical therapy, medical care, practical support, not wishful thinking disguised as faith." Rebecca felt anger flare in her chest. "You think I'm being foolish. I think you're desperate. I think we both are. And desperate people are vulnerable to false hope. Maybe false hope is better than no hope at all." Daniel stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I cannot do this right now. I have another shift starting at 5 in the morning. I need to sleep." He left Rebecca sitting alone at the table with half-eaten food growing cold on both their plates. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to make him understand that she was suffocating under the weight of their reality, and Mrs. Thompson's stories were the only thing giving her room to breathe. But Daniel had already closed the bedroom door. Rebecca cleared the table and washed the dishes. Then she walked to Ethan's room and stood in the doorway, watching her son sleep. His legs were twisted at odd angles, even in rest, his body unable to relax completely. She thought about Mrs. Thompson's words. Faith is continuing when everything is hard. She was continuing. Every single day, she was continuing. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all faith really meant. On Friday, Mrs. Thompson made an unusual request. She stood in the doorway before leaving, her hands clasped together nervously. "Rebecca, I have something that has belonged to my family for many generations. An image of the Virgin Mary. It is very precious to me, and I feel strongly that Ethan would benefit from having it nearby." Rebecca hesitated. Accepting a religious image felt like crossing a line, making a commitment she was not ready for. "I appreciate the thought, Mrs. Thompson, but I am not sure. You do not need to pray to it or worship it or anything like that. It is simply a beautiful piece, but I am certain it would bring peace to Ethan. I have learned to trust these feelings over the years." Rebecca looked back at Ethan, who was watching them both with his bright, attentive eyes. "Let me think about it." "Of course, dear. There is no pressure. Just know the offer stands whenever you are ready." After Mrs. Thompson left, Rebecca sat with Ethan and wondered what Daniel would say if she accepted. He would see it as giving in to superstition, as abandoning reason for mysticism. But Rebecca was tired of Reason. Reason had given her nothing but a list of everything her son would never do. Maybe it was time to try something different. Would you like me to continue to Chapter 5? On Monday afternoon, Mrs. Thompson arrived carrying a small wooden box wrapped in faded blue velvet cloth. She held it carefully, as if it contained something infinitely fragile and precious. Rebecca opened the door and immediately noticed the unusual solemnity in the elderly woman's expression. "Mrs. Thompson, is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect, dear. I brought the image I mentioned. May I come in?" Rebecca stepped aside, her heart beating faster. She had spent the weekend thinking about the offer, weighing Daniel's certain disapproval against her own desperate need for something, anything, that might help. Mrs. Thompson sat on the couch and carefully unwrapped the velvet cloth. Inside the wooden box was a porcelain figurine no more than 6 inches tall. The Virgin Mary stood with her hands folded in prayer, draped in robes of pale blue and white. The craftsmanship was exquisite, delicate, clearly very old. The face was serene, peaceful, with an expression that seemed to hold both sorrow and infinite compassion. "My great-grandmother brought this from Italy in 1873. It has watched over 5 generations of my family, through wars and depressions and illnesses and losses, through births and marriages and every kind of joy and sorrow you can imagine." Rebecca stared at the image, transfixed. "It is beautiful. More than that, it is blessed, not by a priest, necessarily, though perhaps by one long ago, but blessed by the prayers of every woman in my family who held it during their darkest hours. My great-grandmother prayed over it when her husband died of typhoid. My grandmother held it when her son was killed in France in 1918. My mother clutched it the night my father's factory burned down. And Mrs. Thompson paused, her voice catching slightly. I prayed to it every day for 6 months while my daughter fought cancer." Rebecca looked up sharply. "Your daughter, she survived. Against all odds, she survived. The doctors called it a medical miracle. I call it answer prayer." Mrs. Thompson held out the box. "I want Ethan to have it." "Mrs. Thompson, I cannot accept this. It is too valuable. It is your family's heritage." "My family's heritage is faith, dear. This is just porcelain and paint. What matters is what it represents. Hope, prayer, the belief that we are not alone in our suffering." Rebecca took the box with trembling hands. "What if Daniel objects? Then we'll not tell him it came from me. Tell him you bought it at an antique shop. Tell him anything you like, but place it somewhere Ethan can see it. I promise you, something good will come from this." After Mrs. Thompson left, Rebecca sat on the couch holding the box for a long time. Ethan was on his floor mat, watching her with curious eyes. She opened the box again and lifted the figurine carefully. The porcelain was cool and smooth in her hands, surprisingly heavy for something so small. She carried it to the living room shelf, the one near Ethan's play area where he spent most of his days. She cleared a space between family photos and placed the Virgin Mary there, angled so Ethan could see it clearly from his mat. The moment she set it down, Ethan made a sound. Not his usual vocalizations, but something different, something almost like recognition. Rebecca turned to look at her son. Ethan was staring at the image with complete focus. His eyes were wide, locked onto the figurine with an intensity that made Rebecca's breath catch. She watched him for several minutes. He did not look away, not once. His usually restless body was perfectly still. "Do you like it, Ethan?" Her son did not respond with words, could not respond with words, but his gaze never wavered from the Virgin Mary's serene face. When Daniel came home that evening, he walked past the shelf 3 times before noticing the new addition. He stopped on his 4th pass through the living room, staring at the figurine. "What is that?" Rebecca had prepared her answer. "I found it at an estate sale downtown. I thought it was pretty. It was only $15. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she told herself it was necessary. Daniel would never accept the image if he knew it came from Mrs. Thompson. Daniel shrugged. "If you like it." He did not notice Ethan's reaction to the image, did not see how their son's eyes kept returning to it again and again throughout the evening. did not witness the strange peace that seemed to settle over the boy whenever he looked at the Virgin Mary's face. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, Rebecca crept back into the living room. She sat on the floor near Ethan's mat and looked at the porcelain figurine. The house was dark except for a small lamp casting warm light across the shelf. Rebecca had not prayed in years. Not since the diagnosis. Not since she decided that if God existed, he clearly did not care about her suffering or her son's pain. But sitting there in the quiet darkness, she felt something shift inside her chest. A softening. An opening. She did not know what to say. Did not know how to pray anymore. So she simply spoke, barely whispering, as if the Virgin Mary might actually be listening. I do not know if you are real. I do not know if prayer works, or if miracles happen, or if any of this means anything. But my son is suffering, and I'm so tired. If there is any mercy in this universe, if there is any grace, please let him feel peace. Please let him know joy. Please let something, anything get better. She sat there for 15 minutes, not moving, barely breathing. Nothing magical happened. No voice spoke from heaven. No light filled the room. But Rebecca felt something she had not felt in 3 years. She felt less alone. Would you like me to continue to chapter 6? The next morning, Rebecca woke before dawn. She had not slept well, her mind churning with thoughts about the prayer she had whispered in the darkness. Part of her felt foolish. A grown woman talking to a porcelain figurine as if it could hear her. But another part, a deeper part she had tried to bury, felt something like relief. She made coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching the sky lighten through the window. When Ethan woke an hour later, Rebecca carried him to his floor mat, as she did every morning. The moment she set him down, his eyes went immediately to the shelf where the Virgin Mary stood. He stared at the image for minutes without blinking. Rebecca had never seen her son so focused on anything. Even his favorite toys could not hold his attention like this. There was something almost reverent in his gaze, as if he recognized something in the figurine's serene face that she could not see. Over the following days, a routine developed. Every afternoon, when Mrs. Thompson finished her stories and left, Rebecca would sit near the shelf and pray. At first, her prayers were tentative, uncertain, barely more than whispered thoughts. Please help him. Please give us strength. Please let something change. But gradually, the prayers deepened. She found herself talking to the Virgin Mary as she would talk to a friend, sharing fears and frustrations she could not voice to anyone else. She told the silent image about her exhaustion, her failing marriage, her terror that she was not enough for Ethan. She confessed her anger at God for letting this happen, her guilt for sometimes resenting the constant caregiving, her shame for occasionally wishing her life was different. The Virgin Mary never answered, but Rebecca felt heard. That was enough. Ethan always joined her during these prayer sessions. He could not speak, could not move to sit beside her, but his eyes never left the image. 15 minutes every afternoon, mother and son sat together in silence, connected by something Rebecca could not name but desperately needed. The changes in Ethan were subtle at first. He seemed calmer, more present. His sleep improved. He smiled more often. During his physical therapy sessions with Sarah Williams, he cooperated in ways he never had before. Sarah noticed immediately. Rebecca, whatever you're doing differently, keep doing it. Ethan is more engaged than I have seen in months. His muscle tone is still severely compromised, but his focus and willingness to work are remarkable. Rebecca told her about the daily prayer sessions, expecting skepticism. Instead, Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Inner peace affects everything. When a child feels emotionally safe and spiritually grounded, their body responds better. It is not magic, but it is real. The mind and body are connected in ways we do not fully understand. Rebecca wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe that something as simple as prayer could make a tangible difference. But she also remembered Daniel's warnings about false hope and fairy tales. She did not tell Daniel about the daily prayers. He noticed the Virgin Mary on the shelf, but said nothing more about it. He noticed that Rebecca seemed less exhausted, that Ethan seemed happier, but he attributed it to Mrs. Thompson's visits providing Rebecca with adult company and a break from caregiving. He did not know that his wife had rediscovered something she thought she had lost forever. For months past, it was now February, cold and gray outside, but something in the Miller house felt warmer. Rebecca no longer dreaded waking up each morning. She still faced the same challenges, the same endless cycle of caregiving and appointments and medications, but she faced them differently, with the quiet certainty that she was not doing it alone. Mrs. Thompson came every afternoon as always. She and Rebecca had become genuine friends, not just caregiver and neighbor. They talked about everything, books and gardens and memories and hopes. Mrs. Thompson never pushed religion directly, never demanded Rebecca adopt specific beliefs. She simply lived her faith quietly, and Rebecca found herself drawn to that quiet strength. One afternoon in late February, Mrs. Thompson asked Rebecca an unexpected question. Have you felt anything unusual lately? Any sense that something is changing? Rebecca considered the question carefully. I feel more peaceful, more hopeful. Is that what you mean? Mrs. Thompson smiled, but there was something knowing in her expression. Perhaps, or perhaps something more is coming. I have learned to recognize when grace is moving in someone's life. There is a particular quality to it, a kind of anticipation in the air. What do you think is going to happen? I do not know exactly, but I've been praying for Ethan every night since I met him, and I feel certain that something extraordinary is approaching. Rebecca wanted to ask more, but Ethan made a sound that drew both women's attention. He was looking at the Virgin Mary image with that same intense focus he had shown since the first day it arrived. But today, something was different. His hands were moving, reaching, as if he wanted to touch the figurine but could not bridge the distance. Mrs. Thompson stood and walked to the shelf. She picked up the Virgin Mary carefully and carried it to Ethan, placing on the floor mat just within his reach. There you go, sweetheart. She is right here with you. Ethan's fingers brushed the porcelain. His face transformed into an expression of pure joy. Rebecca felt tears sting her eyes. She did not understand what was happening, but she knew it mattered. Knew it meant something. Mrs. Thompson returned to the couch and sat beside Rebecca, taking her hand gently. Keep praying, dear. Keep believing. Something beautiful is coming. I can feel it. Rebecca squeezed the elderly woman's hand and watched her son touch the Virgin Mary's serene face with trembling fingers. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that miracles might actually be possible. Would you like me to continue to Chapter 7? Sarah Williams had been a physical therapist for 20 years. She had worked with hundreds of children with cerebral palsy, understood the condition's limitations, knew what was possible and what was not. So when Ethan began showing improvements that defied her clinical understanding, she paid attention. It started small. During a Friday afternoon session in early March, Ethan demonstrated muscle control in his lower legs that simply had not existed the week before. Sarah tested his reflexes repeatedly, certain she was making an error. She was not. Rebecca, can you come here for a moment? Rebecca looked up from the magazine she had been reading in the corner. Is something wrong? No, something is right. Watch this. Sarah positioned Ethan on his back and gently manipulated his left leg. Normally, the spasticity in his muscles made this difficult, his leg rigid and resistant. But today, the leg moved more freely, more naturally. Sarah tested the right leg. Same result. Has Dr. Martinez changed any of his medications? No. Everything is the same as it has been for months. Sarah sat back on her heels, studying Ethan with the intensity of someone confronting an impossibility. I do not want to overstate this, but I am seeing motor control improvements that should not be happening. Cerebral palsy does not spontaneously improve like this. What are you saying? I am saying I do not know what I'm saying. But whatever you have been doing, whatever changes you have made in his routine, his emotional state, his environment, keep doing it. Something is working. That evening, Rebecca shared the news with Daniel over dinner. He listened with his usual skepticism. Fort paused halfway to his mouth. Sarah says Ethan is showing improvements. Real, measurable improvements in his leg muscles. That is good. Maybe the physical therapy is finally paying off. Daniel, we have been doing physical therapy for years. Sarah says this is different. She says she cannot explain it medically. Daniel set down his fork. What are you suggesting, Rebecca? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what his therapist said. Because it sounds like you're hinting at something supernatural. Like those prayers of yours are magically fixing his cerebral palsy. Rebecca felt her face flush. I did not say that, but you're thinking it. You and Mrs. Thompson and that image on the shelf. You think praying to a statue is healing our son. It is not a statue. It is a figurine. And I do not know what is healing him, Daniel. But something is changing. Sarah is a professional. She would not say this unless it was real. Or maybe Sarah is just trying to be encouraging. Maybe she sees a mother desperate for good news and tells her what she wants to hear. Rebecca stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Sarah Williams has 2 decades of experience. She does not lie to make parents feel better. She is honest, sometimes brutally honest. If she says something is changing, then something is changing. Fine, something is changing. But it is not because you whispered some prayers to a piece of porcelain. Then what is it, Daniel? What is causing our son to suddenly develop motor control that did not exist before? I do not know. Better therapy technique. Natural development. Random variation. Medicine is not an exact science. Sometimes things happen we cannot fully explain. Rebecca stared at her husband across the table. When did you become so closed off to possibility? When did you decide that anything you cannot measure or quantify must be false? When I realized that false hope hurts worse than no hope at all. The silence between them stretched long and painful. Finally, Rebecca turned and walked out of the kitchen. She found Ethan on his floor mat, as always, his eyes fixed on the Virgin Mary on the shelf. She sat beside him and placed her hand on his back. Your father loves you very much. He is just afraid. We are all afraid. Ethan made a soft sound, his version of acknowledgement. Rebecca closed her eyes and prayed silently, not asking for anything specific, just expressing gratitude for the small improvements, the tiny signs that maybe, just maybe, something extraordinary was happening. The following week brought more changes. Sarah documented everything carefully, creating detailed notes about Ethan's progress. Improved muscle tone in both legs. Better reflexes. Increased range of motion. Longer periods of control movement. She ordered new tests, wanting objective medical data to support what she was observing. She consulted with colleagues, describing Ethan's case without mentioning Rebecca's prayers or the Virgin Mary figurine. The consensus was cautious interest. Unusual, certainly. Unexplained, definitely. But not impossible. Sometimes children with cerebral palsy showed unexpected improvements as their brains developed alternative neural pathways. But Sarah knew this was different. She had seen children develop alternative pathways before. This was not that. This was something else entirely. On a Thursday afternoon in late March, Sarah pulled Rebecca aside after the session ended. I need to be honest with you. What I'm seeing with Ethan goes beyond anything in my professional experience. I have worked with cerebral palsy cases for 20 years. This kind of improvement, this rapidly, without any medical intervention or medication changes, I have never witnessed it before. What do you think it means? Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I think it means you should keep doing whatever you are doing. I do not know if it is the prayers, the emotional peace, the daily routine with Mrs. Thompson, or something else entirely. But something is working, and we need to build on it. She paused, then added quietly. Off the record, Rebecca, I was raised Catholic. I went to church every Sunday as a child. I stopped going years ago because I got busy and distracted and forgot why it mattered. But watching Ethan, seeing these changes, I find myself wanting to pray again. Rebecca felt tears fill her eyes. You think God is healing him. I think something beyond my understanding is happening. Whether you call that God or grace or the Virgin Mary or simply the mysterious connection between mind and body and spirit, I do not know. But yes, I think Ethan is being helped by something more than just physical therapy. That night, Rebecca prayed longer than usual. She thanked the Virgin Mary for the improvements, small as they were. She asked for continued healing, for strength, for wisdom to know how to help her son. And she prayed for Daniel, that he might open his heart to the possibility that miracles still happened in the modern world. Ethan watched her pray, his eyes never leaving the figurine's peaceful face. And for the first time, Rebecca noticed something extraordinary. Ethan's legs, usually bent and rigid, were lying almost straight, almost relaxed, almost normal. Would you like me to continue to Chapter 8? The miracle happened on a Wednesday afternoon in April. Rebecca would remember every detail for the rest of her life. The way sunlight streamed through the living room window, the smell of coffee still lingering from breakfast, the sound of birds singing outside. Everything ordinary until it became extraordinary. Mrs. Thompson had left 20 minutes earlier after her daily visit and storytelling session. Ethan was on his floor mat, as always, positioned near his therapy equipment. Rebecca was folding laundry on the couch, her mind wandering through the mental checklist of afternoon tasks. Doctor appointment next week. Prescription refills needed. Call insurance about denied claim. Then she noticed something unusual. Ethan had become completely still, his body rigid with focus. His eyes were locked on the Virgin Mary figurine on the shelf with an intensity she had never seen before. Not even during their daily prayers did he look at the image with such complete absorption. "Ethan, sweetheart, are you okay?" He did not respond, did not even seem to hear her. His entire being was concentrated on the porcelain figure in blue and white robes. Rebecca set down the laundry and moved closer, concerned. Then she noticed his hands. They were moving, pressing against the floor mat with deliberate pressure. His arms, usually so weak and uncoordinated, were pushing his body upward. Rebecca froze, afraid to breathe, afraid to break whatever was happening. Ethan lifted himself onto his knees, something he had never done independently in his entire life. His legs, permanently bent and rigid with spasticity, were supporting his weight. His face showed fierce concentration, every muscle straining with effort. Then came the fragrance, sudden and overwhelming. The scent of fresh roses filled the entire room, so strong it made Rebecca dizzy. But there were no roses anywhere in the house. No flowers at all. The smell had no source, no explanation, yet was undeniably real. Rebecca's heart began racing. Something impossible was happening. She could feel it in the air, a presence, a weight of significance that made her skin prickle. Ethan pushed himself further upward. His feet planted flat on the floor. His legs straightened. And then, with agonizing slowness, he stood. Stood completely upright, without support, without assistance, without anything holding him except his own muscles and bones and an inexplicable power flowing through his damaged neural pathways. Rebecca could not move, could not speak, could not process what she was witnessing. Ethan stood for 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, his body swaying slightly but maintaining balance. Then he lifted his right foot and took a step forward, toward the shelf, toward the Virgin Mary. Another step. His left foot moved forward with jerky, uncoordinated motion, but it moved. It carried his weight. It propelled him forward. A third step. Ethan was walking. Her son, who should never walk according to every medical expert who had ever examined him, was walking across the living room. Rebecca screamed, not from fear, but from shock, from overwhelming emotion that had nowhere else to go. She screamed and tears flooded her face, and her hands covered her mouth as she watched her son take 3 impossible steps toward the image of the Virgin Mary. Then Ethan's legs gave out. He collapsed forward onto his hands and knees, exhausted, his body trembling violently from the effort. But he was smiling, smiling with pure joy and something like triumph. Rebecca rushed to him, dropping to the floor and pulling him into her arms. She was sobbing, her whole body shaking. "Ethan, Ethan, baby, you walked. You walked. Oh my God, you walked." She held him and cried and thanked the Virgin Mary and God and every saint she could remember from childhood catechism. The scent of roses still filled the room, impossible and beautiful and terrifying in its implications. When she could finally control herself enough to stand, Rebecca carried Ethan to the couch and grabbed her phone with trembling hands. She called Daniel at work, her voice breaking with every word. Daniel, Daniel, you need to come home right now. What happened? Is Ethan okay? Rebecca, what is wrong? Nothing is wrong. Everything is. She could not find words. He walked, Daniel. Ethan walked. He stood up on his own and walked to the Virgin Mary. I saw it with my own eyes. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Rebecca, 3 steps, Daniel. He took 3 steps on his own. Rebecca, are you sure? Are you certain you did not imagine? I'm absolutely certain. I watched him stand. I watched him walk. There was this smell, this fragrance of roses that came from nowhere. Daniel, something miraculous just happened to our son. I'm leaving right now. Do not move. Do not do anything. I will be there in 20 minutes. Rebecca hung up and sat holding Ethan, still trembling. She looked at the Virgin Mary figurine on the shelf, at that serene porcelain face that had witnessed the impossible. She did not understand what had happened, did not know if it was divine intervention or neurological anomaly or something beyond human comprehension. But she knew what she had seen. Her son had walked. Against every medical prediction, against all logic and reason, Ethan had stood and taken 3 steps. She positioned Ethan on the floor again, kneeling beside him. Can you do it again, sweetheart? Can you show me it was real? Ethan looked at the Virgin Mary with that same intense focus. He placed his hands on the floor and began the agonizing process of pushing himself upward. His body shook with effort. Sweat broke out on his forehead. But slowly, impossibly, he lifted himself to his knees again. This time he could not stand completely. The first miracle had exhausted him too much, but he maintained the kneeling position for several seconds before collapsing back onto his mat. It was real. It had happened. Rebecca's son, her beautiful, impossible son, had defied every limitation placed on him by his damaged brain and broken body. He had walked toward the Virgin Mary, and nothing would ever be the same. Would you like me to print the complete status now? Daniel left work in the middle of his shift. He told his supervisor there was a family emergency, which was not exactly a lie. His son had just walked. His son, who every doctor said would never walk, had taken 3 steps toward a porcelain figurine. The 20-minute drive home felt like hours. His mind churned with possibilities. Rebecca had been mistaken. She had wanted so desperately to see improvement that she imagined it. Ethan had simply fallen forward and Rebecca interpreted it as walking. There had to be a rational explanation. But when he burst through the front door and found Rebecca sitting on the floor beside Ethan, her face streaked with tears, her hands shaking, he knew she had not been mistaken. Show me. Rebecca looked up at him with eyes that held both terror and joy. I do not know if he can do it again. He is tired, Daniel. It took everything he had. Try, please. Rebecca positioned Ethan on his knees the way he had been when it happened. She placed the Virgin Mary figurine about 4 feet away on the carpet. Ethan looked at the image with that same intense focus he had shown since the day it arrived. Come on, sweetheart. Can you do it again? Can you show Daddy? For a long moment, nothing happened. Ethan stared at the Virgin Mary, his body trembling with effort. Daniel felt disappointment beginning to settle in his chest. It had been a fluke, a random muscle spasm, not a miracle. Then Ethan moved. Not 3 steps this time. He was too exhausted for that. But he supported himself on his hands and managed to lift his body into a kneeling position. Then, with visible strain, he pushed up onto his feet. He stood. For perhaps 5 seconds, he stood on his own without support. Then his legs gave out, and he collapsed back onto the mat. Daniel could not breathe. He stared at his son, at the boy who should never have been able to stand, who had just defied every medical opinion ever given about his condition. He dropped to his knees beside Ethan and pulled him into his arms. My God, Ethan. Rebecca was crying again. Do you believe me now? Daniel could not speak. He held his son and felt his entire worldview cracking apart. Everything he believed about reality, about what was possible and impossible, about faith and science and reason, all of it shattered in the face of what he had just witnessed. We need to call Dr. Martinez. Rebecca nodded. I already left him a message. He said he can see us first thing tomorrow morning. That night, neither Daniel nor Rebecca slept. They sat together on the couch watching Ethan sleep on his mat, both of them afraid that if they looked away, the miracle would somehow reverse itself. Daniel held Rebecca's hand, the first time he had touched her with affection in months. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am sorry I did not believe you. I am sorry I dismissed your faith. I am sorry I was not there when you needed me." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "You are here now." The next morning, they took Ethan to Dr. Martinez's office. The neurologist had reviewed Rebecca's message multiple times, his skepticism evident even in his voicemail response. But he agreed to see them immediately. Dr. Martinez was a careful, methodical man in his late 50s who had been practicing neurology for 30 years. He examined Ethan with the same thoroughness he had shown at every previous appointment. Reflexes, muscle tone, range of motion, neurological responses. He asked Ethan to perform various movements, documenting everything meticulously. Then he asked Rebecca to describe exactly what she had witnessed. Rebecca told him everything. The prayers, the Virgin Mary image, Ethan's fixation on it, the sudden ability to kneel, to stand, to walk 3 steps. She expected him to dismiss it, to offer some medical explanation that would reduce the miracle to coincidence. Instead, Dr. Martinez sat back in his chair and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose wearily. "Mrs. Miller, I have reviewed Ethan's entire medical history this morning. His initial diagnosis, all subsequent examinations, the MRI scans showing the extent of brain damage from oxygen deprivation at birth. Based on that data, what you are describing should not be possible. But you saw him stand just now." "I did, and I have no medical explanation for it. Ethan's neurological condition has not changed. The brain damage is still present. The neural pathways necessary for voluntary motor control in his legs do not exist. And yet, somehow, he is demonstrating motor abilities that should be impossible given his condition." "So what does that mean, doctor?" Dr. Martinez put his glasses back on and looked at Daniel and Rebecca with an expression that was equal parts professional detachment and personal bewilderment. "It means your son has developed capabilities that contradict everything we understand about cerebral palsy and neurological development. From a scientific standpoint, I cannot explain what has happened. But as a physician, and as a father myself, I can tell you that I am witnessing something extraordinary." "Is he healed?" "No. Ethan still has cerebral palsy. He still has significant motor impairment. He still needs specialized care and ongoing therapy. But he has gained abilities that did not exist before and should not exist now. Whether you call that a miracle or an unexplained medical phenomenon, I will leave to you." Dr. Martinez stood and shook Daniel's hand. "I am going to recommend intensifying his physical therapy immediately. We need to build on these new abilities while we have the opportunity. I am also ordering a full battery of new tests: MRI, neurological mapping, muscle studies. I want to document everything thoroughly." He paused at the door. "Off the record, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I have been a physician for 3 decades. I have seen many things I could not fully explain. Medicine is not as exact as we like to pretend. Sometimes things happen that defy our understanding. This appears to be one of those times." After they left the doctor's office, Daniel drove home in silence. Rebecca sat beside him, holding Ethan, both of them exhausted but unable to stop smiling. Finally, at a red light, Daniel spoke. "I need to talk to Mrs. Thompson." Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "Why?" "Because I need to apologize to her, and because I need to understand what she knew that I did not." That afternoon, Daniel knocked on Mrs. Thompson's door 3 houses down. The elderly woman opened it with her usual warm smile, unsurprised to see him. "Mr. Miller, please come in." Daniel stood awkwardly in her small living room. This woman he had judged and dismissed and resented. "Mrs. Thompson, I owe you an apology. I did not believe. I thought you were filling my family's heads with false hope. I was wrong." Mrs. Thompson gestured for him to sit. "You are not wrong to be skeptical, Daniel. Faith is not something that can be forced or proven. It must be discovered. How did you know? How did you know something would happen with Ethan?" Mrs. Thompson smiled gently. I did not know. I only believed. And belief, real belief, has power we cannot fully comprehend. Your wife's prayers, your son's openness, the grace of the Virgin Mary, all of it working together. That is how miracles happen, Daniel. Not through magic, but through faith meeting grace at exactly the right moment. Daniel felt tears on his face for the first time in years. My son walked. I know, dear. And he will walk again. This is only the beginning. Would you like me to continue to chapter 10? The following weeks transformed the Miller household in ways that went far beyond Ethan's physical improvements. Daniel, who had not prayed since childhood, began joining Rebecca for the daily prayer sessions. He felt awkward at first, uncertain what to say or how to say it, but Mrs. Thompson guided him gently. Prayer is just conversation with God, Daniel. Speak from your heart. That is all that matters. So Daniel spoke from his heart. He thanked the Virgin Mary for what she had done for his son. He apologized for his years of skepticism and closed-mindedness. He asked for guidance in becoming the father Ethan deserved. And slowly, haltingly, he found that prayer brought him the same peace it had brought Rebecca. Sarah Williams redesigned Ethan's entire physical therapy program. Now we have possibilities we never had before. We're going to work on strengthening these new abilities, building muscle memory, teaching his body what it can do. The sessions became more intensive. Ethan participated with enthusiasm that amazed everyone. He seemed to understand, in his limited way, that something extraordinary had happened to him, that he had been given a gift that required his cooperation to fully realize. The improvements continued gradually. Ethan could stand independently for longer periods, first 10 seconds, then 20, then a full minute. He took more steps, never more than 4 or 5 at a time, always with tremendous effort, but undeniably walking. His legs remained weak, his balance uncertain, his movements uncoordinated. But he was doing things that every doctor had sworn were impossible. Mrs. Thompson visited every day, as always, but now Daniel welcomed her presence. He and the elderly woman sat together while Rebecca worked with Ethan on his exercises, and Mrs. Thompson shared stories from her own life. Stories about faith-tested and faith-rewarded. Stories about times she had doubted and times she had believed against all reason. You know, Daniel, miracles are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are quiet. Sometimes they are slow. The real miracle is not just that Ethan walked. It is that your family has been healed, that you and Rebecca have found each other again, that you have discovered faith. Those are miracles, too. Daniel realized she was right. His marriage, which had been dying slowly under the weight of stress and exhaustion and hopelessness, had been resurrected. He and Rebecca talked again, really talked about things beyond schedules and medications and bills. They laughed together. They held hands. They remembered why they had fallen in love years ago. The news spread through the neighborhood despite their attempts at privacy. Other families with disabled children began reaching out, asking questions, seeking hope. Rebecca and Daniel welcomed them all, careful never to promise guaranteed miracles, but offering the testimony of their own experience. We do not know why it happened to us, Rebecca would explain to other mothers. We only know that we prayed with sincere faith, and something extraordinary occurred. Your situation may be different, but hope is never wrong. Prayer is never wasted. Some people believed. Some people dismissed it as coincidence or misdiagnosis or exaggeration. But for those who witnessed Ethan stand on his own, take those impossible steps, there was no room for doubt. They were seeing something that should not exist. A local television news station contacted them, wanted to do a story about the miracle child. Daniel and Rebecca declined. This is private, Daniel told the reporter. This is about our son and our faith, not about publicity. But they could not stop people from talking. Ethan became known in their community as the boy the Virgin Mary healed. Some people treated him with reverence that made Rebecca uncomfortable. Others treated him as proof that God still performed miracles in the modern world. A few treated the whole situation as religious hysteria, pointing to the boy's ongoing disabilities as evidence that no real miracle had occurred. Rebecca learned to ignore the skeptics. She knew what she had witnessed. She knew what her son could do now that he could not do before. She knew the power of sincere prayer and genuine faith. Mrs. Thompson, now 73, told Rebecca one afternoon that meeting Ethan had been the most meaningful experience of her entire life. God used me to bring that image to him. But Ethan taught me something too. He taught me that faith is not about understanding everything. It is about trusting even when nothing makes sense. 6 months after the miracle, Dr. Martinez conducted comprehensive follow-up testing. The results were both fascinating and frustrating. Ethan's brain scans showed no changes from previous imaging. The damage from oxygen deprivation at birth remained exactly as it had been. The neural pathways necessary for voluntary leg movement still did not exist anatomically. And yet Ethan could stand, could walk short distances, could do things that should be neurologically impossible. I can write a paper about this, Dr. Martinez told them, but I do not think any medical journal would publish it. The data contradicts itself. Your son is doing things his brain should not allow him to do. From a scientific perspective, it makes no sense. But from a faith perspective, Rebecca said quietly, it makes perfect sense. Dr. Martinez nodded slowly. Perhaps that is the real lesson here. That there are some things science cannot explain, and we need the humility to acknowledge our limitations. Daniel went back to work at the manufacturing plant, but he was different now. His co-workers noticed the change. He smiled more. He talked about his son with pride instead of sadness. He no longer worked double shifts, choosing instead to spend evenings at home with his family. One night, lying in bed beside Rebecca in the darkness, Daniel spoke the words he had been thinking for weeks. The Virgin Mary did not just heal Ethan's legs. She healed our entire family. Rebecca turned to face him, though they could barely see each other in the dark. I know. I was so angry, Rebecca. For so long, I was just angry at everything. At God for letting this happen. At the doctors for not being able to fix it. At you for still having hope when I had none. At myself for failing our son. You did not fail anyone. I felt like I did. Every day, I felt like I was failing. But now, Daniel paused, searching for the right words. Now I understand that sometimes we have to let go of control. Sometimes we have to trust in something bigger than ourselves. Rebecca reached for his hand in the darkness. It took me a long time to learn that too. They lay together in silence, listening to the soft sounds of Ethan sleeping in his room down the hall. Their son, who should never have walked, who defied medical science and rational explanation, who had become a living testament to the power of faith. The miracle had not given them a perfectly healthy child. Ethan still had cerebral palsy. He still needed care and therapy and patience. But the miracle had given them hope, had given them faith, had given them each other again. And sometimes that is the greatest miracle of all. Would you like me to continue to Chapter 11? The Miller home became a quiet sanctuary for families facing similar struggles. Rebecca never advertised their availability, but word spread through support groups and church communities and medical offices. Parents of disabled children would call nervously, apologetically, asking if they could visit, if they could see Ethan, if they could just talk to someone who understood. Rebecca welcomed them all. A woman named Patricia came on a Tuesday afternoon with her 5-year-old daughter Sophia, who had been born with spina bifida. Patricia sat on the Miller's couch with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands, watching Ethan take 3 careful steps across the living room with Rebecca's support. The doctors say Sophia will never walk, that her spinal cord damage is too severe. But seeing Ethan, seeing what happened to him, Patricia's voice broke. I just need to know if there is hope. Rebecca sat beside her and took her hand. I cannot promise you a miracle like ours. I do not know why God chose to help Ethan, but I can promise you that prayer matters, that faith matters, that you are not alone in this struggle. She showed Patricia the Virgin Mary figurine on the shelf, told her the story of Mrs. Thompson and the daily prayers and Ethan's inexplicable connection to the image. Patricia listened with desperate attention, as if Rebecca's words were water and she was dying of thirst. Can I pray here? With you? Of course. They prayed together that afternoon, Two mothers united by their children's suffering and their fragile, fierce hope. When Patricia left an hour later, she was still crying, but the tears were different. Less despair, more possibility. Over the following months, dozens of families visited. Some came once, some came weekly. The Millers never charged anything, never asked for donations, never tried to profit from their experience. This was not about money or fame. It was about sharing hope with people who had none. Daniel took time off work to be present for many of these visits. He found that talking with other fathers, men who were exhausted and frightened and struggling to provide for families with overwhelming medical needs, helped him process his own journey. He told them about his skepticism, his anger, his eventual surrender to faith. He did not preach. He simply shared his truth. One father, a man named Robert whose son had muscular dystrophy, asked Daniel the question everyone wondered but few voiced directly. Do you really think the Virgin Mary healed your son? Or do you think it was just some unexplained medical development that happened to coincide with your wife's prayers? Daniel considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, I would have said it was coincidence. I would have insisted there had to be a rational explanation. But I watched my son stand when every doctor said it was impossible. I saw him take steps his brain should not be able to command his legs to make. So yes, I believe the Virgin Mary healed him. I believe prayer has power. I believe miracles still happen. Robert nodded slowly. I want to believe that. I'm just so tired of hoping. I know. Daniel put his hand on the other man's shoulder. Believe me, I know. But the alternative is giving up completely. And I cannot do that anymore. The local Catholic church, St. Anthony's, invited Rebecca to speak at a special healing Massachusetts. She was terrified. She had never been a public speaker, never been comfortable with attention. But she felt obligated to share what had happened, to offer her testimony to people who needed it. She stood at the altar in front of 200 people and told Ethan's story. Her voice shook. Her hands trembled. But she spoke from her heart about despair and faith and impossible miracles. When she finished, the church was silent except for the sound of people crying. Afterward, a line of people waited to speak with her. Elderly women who had prayed their entire lives. Young mothers with sick children. Men who had lost faith and were trying to find it again. Rebecca listened to each person, offered what comfort she could, and promised to pray for them all. Mrs. Thompson attended the Mass, sitting in the back pew with tears streaming down her weathered face. When Rebecca found her afterward, the elderly woman embraced her tightly. You have become what I hoped you would become, dear. Not just a mother with a miracle child, but a witness to grace. A light for others walking in darkness. I do not feel like a light. I feel scared and inadequate. That is exactly how every prophet and saint has felt. Mrs. Thompson smiled. The Virgin Mary works through imperfect, frightened people. That is the whole point. Ethan continued his physical therapy with Sarah Williams, who documented every improvement meticulously. By 8 months after the initial miracle, Ethan could stand independently for 5 full minutes. He could walk short distances without support, 10 or 12 steps before his legs gave out. He could not run or jump or climb stairs. He still needed his wheelchair for most activities, but he was doing things that should have been impossible. Sarah submitted a case study to a medical journal, carefully documenting Ethan's condition, the lack of anatomical changes in his brain, and his inexplicable motor improvements. The journal rejected it. The reviewers called it insufficient evidence, questioned the accuracy of the initial diagnosis, suggested the improvements were within normal variation for cerebral palsy cases. Sarah was furious. They are rejecting it because they cannot explain it, because it does not fit their understanding of how neurology works. They would rather deny the evidence than admit there are things they do not understand. Rebecca was not surprised. People believe what they need to believe. The skeptics will always find reasons to doubt. We do not need a medical journal to validate what happened. We know the truth. For the families who visited the Millers, for the people who witnessed Ethan stand and walk, for those who heard Rebecca speak at the church, Ethan became more than a child with cerebral palsy. He became a symbol, living proof that the impossible could happen, that prayers were heard, that the Virgin Mary still cared for her children in the modern world. Some people called it a miracle. Some called it unexplained medical phenomenon. Some called it wishful thinking and confirmation bias. But for Rebecca and Daniel and everyone whose lives have been touched by Ethan's story, the terminology did not matter. What mattered was hope. What mattered was faith. What mattered was the absolute certainty that they were not alone in their struggles. Mrs. Thompson, now 74, reflected one afternoon while watching Ethan practice walking between parallel bars Sarah had installed in the Millers' living room. You know what the real miracle is, Rebecca? Not that Ethan walks. The real miracle is that hundreds of people have had their faith strengthened because of him. Families who were giving up have found hope. People who stopped praying have started again. That is the gift the Virgin Mary gave through your son. Rebecca watched Ethan take careful, determined steps, his face scrunched with concentration and effort. You are right. This was never just about Ethan. It was about showing everyone that miracles still happen, that we should never stop believing. Exactly. Mrs. Thompson smiled. And that is a miracle that will continue long after we are gone. Would you like me to continue to chapter 12? 1 year after the miracle, the Miller family gathered around the Virgin Mary figurine for their daily prayer. It had become their sacred ritual, the anchor of their day, the moment when they acknowledged the extraordinary grace that had transformed their lives. Ethan was 8 years old now. He still had cerebral palsy, still needed specialized care and constant attention, still used his wheelchair for long distances and required support equipment for many activities. The miracle had not cured him completely, but he could stand on his own for 5 full minutes without wavering. He could take short walks across the room, 15 or 20 steps before needing to rest. He could participate in activities that had once been unthinkable. Swimming therapy, adaptive sports, playing with other children in ways that brought him joy instead of frustration. More importantly, he was happy, genuinely, deeply happy in a way that transcended his physical limitations. Daniel had discovered a faith he never imagined he would have. He attended Mass every Sunday now, sometimes twice a week. He prayed daily, not with the desperation of someone begging for miracles, but with the gratitude of someone who had witnessed one. His co-workers noticed the change. His family saw it. He had become a man at peace with uncertainty, trusting in grace rather than demanding control. The Virgin Mary did not just change my son's legs, Rebecca reflected one evening to a visiting family. She changed our entire family. She changed how we see the world, how we face challenges, how we love each other. That is the real miracle. Mrs. Thompson, now 75 years old, still visited regularly, though less frequently as her own health declined. She considered meeting Ethan the most special experience of her life, more meaningful even than her own daughter's recovery from cancer years earlier. God used me to bring that image to him. But Ethan taught me about true faith. He taught me that miracles are not always about fixing what is broken. Sometimes they are about revealing what was always whole underneath the brokenness. For the local community, Ethan had become living proof that the Virgin Mary still performed miracles today. His story had strengthened the faith of hundreds of people and brought comfort to families struggling with disability, illness, and loss. Churches throughout the region shared his testimony. Support groups invited Rebecca to speak. Medical professionals who had witnessed his improvements told their colleagues, even when those colleagues dismissed it as impossible. The miracle of the Virgin Mary was not only about making a child walk. It was about transforming an entire family, an entire community, an entire way of seeing life and suffering and hope. For Rebecca and Daniel, Ethan was not just their special son. He was living proof that we must never give up, never lose hope, never underestimate the power of sincere prayer. Our Lady looks especially after children. Rebecca always told other mothers who visited seeking hope. And when a mother prays with true faith, miracles can happen. This story proved that miracles were not legends from the past. They were present-day realities for those who had hearts open to divine grace. Ethan Miller walked, and by walking, He showed the world that faith still moved mountains, that prayers were still heard, that the Virgin Mary still cared for her special children. A miracle that changed a family forever and continued changing lives around the world, one prayer at a time. Now I would like to invite you to a brief prayer. Most Holy Virgin, Mother who welcomes her children in the silence of difficult nights, Mother who walks with us along the roads of pain and hope before we place our lives. You know the hidden tears, the unspoken prayers, the fears we carry in secret. You know every heart that cries out for help, and every soul that silently waits for a miracle. Stretch over us your mantle of tenderness. Carry to the heart of your Son, Jesus, our supplications and needs. May your presence give us peace. May your intercession strengthen us and teach us to trust even when everything seems impossible. O Mary, Mother of miracles, renew in us the flame of faith. Make hope blossom where there is only desert, and grant us the grace to live each day with the certainty that we are never alone. May peace reign in our families. May consolation arise in our sorrows, and may our hearts dwell in the confidence that God continues to act in history through your loving intercession. And now I want to hear from you. Do you believe that the miracles of the Virgin Mary still happen today? Write your answer in the comments, or even share your testimony of faith. Perhaps your comment will console and strengthen someone in need of hope.